And hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Shabbat Show. It's great to be back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Another episode as we chart our way into spring and summer and so much going on. This is such an incredible time of the year, both in the world as we see winter behind us, spring upon us, summer in our vision, and also in the Jewish calendar as we enter into this period of time that we're living in right now, which is called the Omer, time in between Passover and Shavuot, the time of introspection and growth, the time where we take upon things upon ourselves to remember the lost, to think about the future. We are in this unique, incredible growth period. And it's great to be with you today. And we've got really an incredible show. It's a powerful show. It's a serious show. And it's an adult show. So I want to begin by just mentioning that we're going to talk about mature topics today. We're going to talk about addiction and recovery. And so please judge it appropriately, depending on who's watching with you and just who's seeing this, because this is a serious topic that we're going to be talking about that has real implications. And this is the period of time to do that. And I want to, before I start, just really begin by sponsoring the show in honor of this show was sponsored as a program of the Carl Enoch Goldman Center for Jewish Values, dedicated by Jay Goldman. We thank Jay Goldman for his constant support of this program. And I want to share with you where we are, what we're doing, and why we are focusing on this right now. You know, like I said, we are this period of time called the Omer. The Omer is a count. It is a count towards Shavuot. Shavuot is the day in which we are commemorating the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai. Now, as you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff we do throughout the year that's super important. You know, Passover is super important. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are super important. Like, we don't just do stuff. You don't make it through the generations. And there's a holiday we're like, well, that's a gimme. There's no gimmies. And we never count. We have a calendar. We set the month. We have a very specific way of doing things. We don't count, with this one exception. We're counting to Mount Sinai. And the commentators and the rabbis speak about this. And what they teach us is that we're not counting down to Mount Sinai. We know when Mount Sinai is. We know when that anniversary is going to be. We know when the holiday is going to be. What we're doing is we're actually counting up. And for those that are involved in this count, you'll notice the count goes up, not down. When you count to an event, it goes down. When you count the Omer, you're counting up, because the count really isn't towards an event. The count is from something. We're growing up. It's an ascent. And what's going on now, what we're remembering, what we are commemorating in this count is the ascent of the Jewish people that was at, as what we say, the 49th level of impurity. A moment where they were nearly lost in the abyss of Egypt. A people that had been slaves for over 200 years. Never, of course, because it wasn't given yet, had Torah. Lost in idol worship, in the mud, in the brokenness of slavery. And what they were doing right now is that they were pulling themselves up with their bootstraps. They were growing together. They were ascending together from a nation of slaves into a nation of not only freemen, but those that were going to be the noble nation that was worthy of taking on the traditions and accepting the Torah from God. To go from a broken victim slave to becoming that which is able to go face to face with the creative universe was the greatest transformation. It was the greatest road of recovery that we know of. And so during this period of time, we count because we are remembering growth. We were improving ourselves. We were working on ourselves. In fact, we have this tradition to learn Pirkei Avot, ethics of our fathers, now, because this is a time of growth. This is a time where we get better and we overcome challenges. And so with that as a backdrop and with that as the theme of this period of time, we're doing a show on addiction, because there is a large, relatively silent minority of people in this world suffering from some form of addiction. And probably a majority of people who know someone suffering from an addiction. And today we're going to talk about it. I'm talking about people that have this incredible ability to overcome this challenge and pick themselves up and be bigger and stronger than before. We're going to talk about we're going to hear from experts about how to recognize these challenges, how to get help from these challenges. Today's show really is a show that is focused on addiction, but not from a perspective of negativity. It's from a perspective of positivity, of the recognition that everyone can grow and overcome, and there's hope, and the ability to grow and overcome incredible challenges is actually it's nestled into our DNA. It is exactly what we are celebrating during this period of time. So we are excited for the show. We've got a team of seasoned therapists and experts and individuals in the field of addiction that are going to be joining us. We have Dr. Akiva Perlman on, Menachem Poznansky, the author and social worker. We have a brave woman in the trenches of helping people recover, Miriam Handelsman. We have Asher Gottesman from LA. We've got videos. We've got an incredible, powerful show of, I think, real heroes. And know you're going to enjoy it and get it and really gain something from it. So let's get going right away. Our first guest is Dr. Akiva Perlman. He's an international speaker on the topics of abuse, addiction, and trauma. He's educated more than 300 of the Jewish Orthodox social workers from our community and is currently serving as a professor at the Wurzweiler School of Social Work. Dr. Perlman is the clinical director of ODA's Wellness Institute, a clinic which serves the Hasidic community in Williamsburg. He maintains a small practice in Fresh Meadows, where he resides with his wife Tamar and children. I had an opportunity to speak to Dr. Perlman, and it was really, really moving. Check out this interview. So can you help us define what an addiction is so that people have a better understanding of it?
Okay, thank you for that question. If it's okay, I want to share a meeting I had yesterday with a dear client of mine who obviously is caught up in a myriad of addictions, suffering a great deal, but just to understand his story, where he was speaking about the first time he used a drug. And I asked him, tell me a little bit about that experience. What was it like? And most often we expect to hear, I was high, I was excited, it was something new, I felt euphoric. But when you speak to addicts about their lived experience, almost always what they're going to share is what it felt to them in their heart, not so much in their body, not a physiological or chemical reaction. And his answer was, when I first used it, I felt as though the world was hugging me. It was embracing me. I felt whole. I felt loved. I felt lovable. And I think if we start looking at addiction through that particular lens, we start really to begin to understand what these people are going through. There's a wonderful researcher named Gabor Mate, who has a practice out in Canada. And he says, you can't understand an addiction until you start asking the question, what benefit does this person derive from having such an addiction? So addiction is almost like a replacement of what in theory should be healthy in one's life. And they're replacing it with some really harmful maladaptive behavior, but for the same goal as anybody else. They're trying to feel okay.
Are there people more likely to fall into these behaviors? Is there something that we can look at it and see individuals that are more or less prone to this?
100%. I think what I've never worked with an addict or even met an addict who didn't suffer a tremendous amount in their life. I've never encountered such a person. Sometimes we read these articles about here's a person that lived a great life, everything was okay, and they stumbled upon a drug and then life just got out of control. I don't buy those stories. My whole experience of my work discourages such stories. Addiction makes sense. When you start paying attention, it really, really makes sense. And to answer your question, the more pain a person lives with in their heart, and the more loss of self that they ultimately have, the more likely they are to go out looking for things that would provide them with some comfort. So we could define pain however we'd like, but the people who tend to find their way into this world are people who are suffering a tremendous amount. For a variety of reasons. It could be divorce, it could be a learning disability, it could be poor self-esteem, but most people who use drugs and then just move on with their lives are generally intact individuals. The people that we're speaking about are just not.
It's interesting that as you're saying it, it's dawning on me that the greatest thing that we can give some of these individuals is the love from everybody, and it almost feels like they're stuck in that the potential shame and the silence of it keeps them feeling apart, when the
Yeah.
community around them and the people around them may be part of the solution, and the embracement of those around may be part of the solution.
100%. Yeah. When you go, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to witness like a 12-step meeting, but one of the things you'll notice about them, which I find to be of the most healing aspects, is that they're all holding each other. At the end of the meeting, they gather around in a circle, they hold hands or embrace, and they recite together the Serenity Prayer, which is a prayer of hope and connection. And that to me is the healing. I once asked one of these guys, I said, why is there so much like hugging? Why is there so much embrace that takes place in this room? And he said, we're making up for lost time.
Wow.
We just didn't have it in our lives, and that is the solution. And unfortunately, usually we go the other direction. I've never
Wow.
met an addict who feels like I'm a lovable person. They hate themselves more than we could possibly be disappointed in their behavior.
What an
Yeah,
incredible thing. But
yeah.
what, if you can share, what triggers, if you will, in the mind of someone who is suffering from an addiction that allows them the strength now to not only, they're not even like resisting from the addiction. Now they have to overcome this now. So now they have to really work harder, if you will, than when they first fell into it. So what's that moment? What's that understanding?
It's a beautiful moment. I wish I could just bring you into my office as that moment unfolds, but we lose sight of the fact that every one of us, like we're all kissed by God. We all have a soul that is like fully connected to this divine beauty. And addicts completely have lost sight of that. It doesn't exist within them. And that moment that you're speaking about is a moment when they encounter their humanity, where they realize that there is something in me that hasn't been nurtured. There is something in me that I haven't been able to see. I remember I had this client, this is generally not the case, but he came in and I said, like, what brought you here? I happened to have seen him the other night. It was just so wonderful to just give him a hug. I haven't seen him in a few years. I said, like, really, what brought you in? And because usually most addicts are coming in because they got caught or they're in trouble or a spouse said enough is enough and you have no choice but to go to therapy. And he said, like, I've been in a binge for the last 3 years, which means he's just been high basically the entire time. He hasn't like landed at any particular point. And he said, just this morning, I looked in the mirror and which I haven't done in around 3 years. And most addicts cannot look in a mirror. And most people who are in pain can't look in a mirror. But he said, I looked in the mirror and I couldn't recall what the pain was anymore. I couldn't recall like what I was running from. I was just sort of caught up in this cycle. And in that moment, he realized like that there's something in me that I don't even know what it is. I've lost sight of myself. I've lost sight of my ability to connect. And I'm here to rediscover that again. And that's the journey looks like. Ultimately, it's like you're bringing a person back to who they already are, because we're all beautiful and we all have Hashem inside of us. We all have godliness inside of us. So we're just trying to remind a person that, hey, by the way, you've lost sight of this, but I haven't. I still believe in you. I still know that there's something beautiful inside of you.
Last question, and I thank you so much for your time. For the families around those that are suffering, that feel helpless, that don't have backgrounds like yours and other professionals, that really are in many cases could be completely overwhelmed by what's in front of them, what would you recommend that they do um, when there's someone in their lives that are suffering from an addiction?
Right. So there's a lot of help, and don't avoid getting help. There's many beautiful organizations. Amudim does beautiful work in this area. Relief does beautiful work in this area. So reach out to the people that could give you that support. But if you could, for yourselves, hold on to the fact that there's a person inside this individual who's suffering that you've sort of lost sight of and they've lost sight of. If you could hold on to the idea that there's something that's beautiful that I need to hold on to and encounter, it just gives us some hope. And we're generally drawn in the other direction. You know, we're moving away from that and we're moving more towards resentment and disappointment. And the more we could remind that individual that they have some inherent beauty, the more likely they are to come back to that place.
Amazing.
Addicts need a place to return to. And what unfortunately happens all the time is that because all the chaos they've created, then all the people that in theory they would have been able to return to have moved away. And then they slowly begin to get healthy and there's no home to return to.
Wow.
So we need to maintain a sense of home, maintain a sense of love. So that way, when they do come around with the right help, with God's help, then they'll have a place to come that's loving and caring.
Amazing. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for what you do for our community and for the world at large and for shining your light on this world.
Thank you. It's a great honor. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. We thank Dr. Perlman for that powerful interview. There was so much more that we spoke about. This and all the interviews of the show will be featured. So please, I'm telling you, these are pieces. These are snippets, if you will. We got to cut it for a 1 hour show. So these interviews have so much more wisdom, this and the rest of them. So please check out the interview on our website, theshabbatshow.com. If you're watching this on any other platform, go to theshabbatshow.com and check out the full interviews. And we thank Dr. Perlman for his incredible, powerful words of hope, his incredible words of spirituality. It's really, really something special that we have in our community. There's a great video from Rabbi David Aaron, really about the power of the soul and the power of each and every one of us. Check this out.
When I was a kid, I felt like a real loser. I was short and had curly red hair. Kids made fun of me and called me Carrot Top. The only comeback I had was that the tops of carrots are green. I also had flat feet and had to wear corrective boots that really looked stupid. When the class was picking soccer teams, I'd hear them argue, You take them. No, you take them. They used to call me Crazy Legs because when I played, I would sometimes miss the ball and kick the nearest guy in the ankle. Although I felt like such a loser, deep inside I knew that I was not. I recall seeing the movie Funny Girl starring Barbra Streisand. It was about a young woman struggling to become a star, but she came across like a loser and a klutz. There was one line in a song that she sang that really struck a deep note within me. I'm the greatest star. I am by far, but no one knows it. I felt that was true for me too, and today I know that it is true for everyone, because we are all souls, and there is no such thing as a loser's soul. Why not? Because the soul, which is the real you, your true self, is none other than an individualized expression of God, the soul of all souls, the great self shared by all. Most people think that God is some super being floating in another realm called heaven, watching us from above. When the first Russian cosmonaut went into space, ground control asked him, "What do you see?" He answered, "I don't see God." What did he think he would see? Did he think that somewhere along his journey he would get to the edge of space and there would be two huge eyes peering at him? "Hi, I'm God. What took you so long?" A lot of people think this way, but this is not what the Torah teaches. God does not exist in heaven and we exist on earth, separate, far, and apart from him. God is not someone over there. Rather, God is the one, the only one. And each and every one of us is someone, some of that one. Every single one of us yearns and deserves to feel like a precious and cherished masterpiece, because in truth, each and every one of us is indeed a piece of the master.
And of course, we thank Rabbi Aaron for his consistent stream of inspiration in every single form. Our next guest is Miriam Handelsman. She's the clinical director of the High School for Girls. She's the former women's program and clinical coordinator for the Living Room and served in that position for 8 years. Miriam is a licensed master social worker, specializing in substance abuse prevention, intervention, and recovery support. Miriam has dedicated her career to assisting young adults who struggle with addiction and mental illness, as well as providing support to their spouses and families. Miriam maintains a private counseling practice in Brooklyn, New York, where she lives with her husband and children. Check out this interview with Miriam. I know that you are involved with addiction. In particular, you spend your world in the female, side of addiction. What is unique to the female struggle with addiction?
Okay, so I would say that the female struggle of addiction is mostly that there's like this false notion that women don't have an issue with alcoholism and substance use and other addictions as well. It was more of like a male thing. And because of that, there's a lot of shame in coming forward and saying that they have addiction, but not only coming forward, even recognizing that they have it. It's kind of like, I'm struggling, but how could this be alcoholism if I'm a woman?
Mm-hmm.
So those two pieces make it very hard for them to be supported with their addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I even have like women that come in actually to support their spouses. It's so easy for them to recognize that their spouse has something. And through the process of looking at them and then looking at themselves, they realize that they also have some sort of addiction as well and are then afraid to face it, but then they end up facing it and living much more meaningful lives.
So it's interesting, and what you're saying is fascinating, that for whatever reason, it becomes harder for them to see their own addictions. So how does somebody notice it? Like, what are some of the maybe the clues or the awarenesses when someone's engaged in behavior, whether it's in eating or in alcoholism or any other type of behavior that would, I guess, fall into behavior that wouldn't be obvious? My sense is if you're in using certain drugs, I guess right away it may be easier, but I guess in other types of substances, it may be harder to recognize the point in which you go into the world of addiction. So how does one begin to see that awareness?
So oftentimes it happens slowly over time, and other times it's pretty quick. You said something about like drugs being something that is easier to recognize, but it's actually interesting because I work with women who some of them actually had like a C-section, and then because of that got prescribed for even like back things, but specifically things that are like OB related, and they don't realize once that addiction is stronger because they think like, oh, my doctor prescribed it. But even in relation to other addictions, I would say that some of the signs, I mean, in general, the signs of addictions, not just women, is when their lives become unmanageable, their relationships become um, sort of like empty, and the noise between them and other people is so great that they can't really have relationships that are really meaningful anymore. And obviously, when things become dangerous and scary, it's hard to recognize it when they themselves are in it. Oftentimes, their loved ones try to point it out to them, but kind of crossing over that threshold is not something that happens very quickly. So it is harder to see. That's about it.
What's the role that the family plays in, both in maybe recognizing it, but also in the impact when once it's recognized and how they can be helpful to help that person get through it?
So the two words that come to mind are being supportive, but then also not enabling. By that, I mean being supportive is really recognizing that this isn't something that once they're really in the addiction, it's not something that they're choosing anymore. Um, Understanding that we really can't judge them. They're human beings that are really struggling. And then the not like on the flip side, if you go too much to that extreme, you can end up enabling them. One of the examples that I was thinking of is there's a book in the Al-Anon recovery, which Al-Anon is for family members of people who are struggling with addiction and alcoholism. And one of the examples, it's a really good example that they give there is I'll just say a spouse, right? Coming home drunk every single night, laying on the floor, like passed out. And the spouse will pick them up every single night and like bring them to the bed and put the blanket on. And then in the morning, the spouse that was, wasted wakes up and they're like, oh, okay, normal day, or try to be a normal day because things are okay. And there was like a shift at some point when the spouse, the one that was supporting them, who was actually enabling them, came home and said, wait a second, I want them to realize the consequences of their action, but I also want to be supportive. So the spouse put a blanket while he was, or in that case, it was he was on the floor, put a blanket on him on the floor so that he wakes up and sees like, oh, I'm being supported and not like judged for it. But yeah, I have an issue. I have a
Mhm.
problem.
And I'm sure that's critically important, especially for women that are in the middle of a family. Like, I would assume that if women are the caretakers, if they're playing the role of caretaker and they're suffering from the addiction, um, that may be exactly the hardest part, which is they probably don't feel as supported because they're needed, if you will, in ways that could be different. But at the
Mm.
same time, they need both that support, but people need to be able to call them out and try to get them to get help.
Right. And I mean, it's very scary in those cases because they're like with little kids, and they, like you said, they're needed. Sometimes I hear women saying like, I don't get to fall apart. Like
Right.
I don't have that option. So I don't get to just say I have an issue because little people are relying on me. So yeah, that makes it even harder for both them and their kids. And I would even say it goes further. There are so many times where like a mom will be talking to a child and the child is not even being heard, the same way that I was saying that like a spouse or a friend, but like when you're hugging your kid and you're thinking about when you can find your next drug or when you can find your next meal that's like part of your addiction or anything like that, and you're not really present with your kid, that's like one of the most difficult parts of addiction in terms of like how it impacts the family.
What does it look like for someone that is in recovery or recovered? Um, what's the hope that somebody could appreciate here now, if they're on, if you will, the wrong side of this and watching this and saying, wait, maybe I really should take it seriously. Um, what does that look like on the other end?
So when you ask me that question, the first thing that comes to mind is all of the faces of the many women that I've worked with, both women who have children, who don't, who got married, who through this process. And the one thing that I would say is like a tremendous sense of gratitude that they even call themselves addicts or even went through the addiction process for the recovery process, because they have real appreciation for life. So what it looks like externally is one thing. They look like you and me and, kind of everyone else walking on the streets that either, are okay or pretending to be okay. Lives with, families and successful careers and all of that. But internally, I would say that I'm sure the other speakers are talking about that, like spirituality and the meaningfulness of their lives. They're just enriched people that are living a life of gratitude. That's what I would
Mhm.
say.
Well, Miriam, thanks so much for being on the show here with us, and thanks for what you do for the community and the world at large, and thank you for shining your light on this world.
Thanks for having me.
We thank Miriam for her incredible words and just the sensitivity of the different parts of the community. They're suffering very differently. I found it to be fascinating just how much the shame is part of this. It struck me that as we went back to Akiva's words and now to Miriam's words, as you see how sometimes the people around those that are struggling really are the people that can help them the most, and not with any specific words of wisdom, not with any bit of advice based on years of counseling experience, but based on the support, the idea of support, the idea of being there, the idea of creating a place where people can come home to, the network around those that are struggling from an addiction could be as powerful as anything and everything else. It's amazing to always remember that everyone is overcoming challenges, and that person inside is holy and there's nothing that can touch that. There's nothing that can touch the true value of the human being. Nothing a person can do can take away from their true value. When we see that in each other, no matter what's going on in someone's life, but especially someone who's suffering from an addiction, the more our eyes are geared on who they could be and who they really are, the more we support them. We thank Miriam for her incredible words. I had the chance to catch up with an incredible individual who suffered himself from an addiction. His name is Asher Gottesman. He's the father of five and the founder of Transcend Recovery Community. He's recovering himself, who's devoted his entire life to helping people help themselves as they recover from addiction and from mental health struggles. Check out this interview that I did with Asher Gottesman. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to addiction.
I, for some reason, had a pit in my stomach that was unfillable by anything else than service work. And it was from a really young age. And I tried so hard to fill it in multiple different ways. And I can go ahead and blame my teachers and blame my experiences. Yet ultimately, the gift I have today of working with people who struggle and suffer, even though there's a famous quote from Rabbi Dr. Abraham Tversky that says there are two types of people in the world, those that are in recovery and those that can be.
Mm-hmm.
So yet the people who I get to work with today, I say the good news is you get to help other people. The bad news is, unfortunately, you have to help other people. It's the only cure, literally the only cure.
It sounded to me that you were saying that you were searching for something deep and meaningful, and you weren't finding it. And it's at the beginning point at some point in your life. And so you were filling that insatiable desire for something with the wrong things. Did I hear that correctly?
I was seeking in all the wrong places,
Right.
and trying to fulfill what I thought was an insatiable appetite, right? Because there was no filling it.
What happened? What did you find, tap into, that made you turn your life back around?
So I actually went to Overeaters Anonymous, because my first drug of choice actually in life was food. I used to be 100 pounds bigger than I am today, and that was my first challenge. About 4 months into going to this Overeaters Anonymous, I had this moment of clarity. It was right after Purim. I was drunk again, and I was, I had this moment where I was like, why am I any different than that junkie on the street who's I'm destroying my life. I'm doing this, you know what? And then I went back into this room, and when I say I had a spiritual experience greater than, I walked into a room where for the first time in my life, nobody cared who I was, what my name was, what board of school I was on, how much money I had, I didn't have. They were all in there to get better. They were all in, and I looked around and I was like, holy cow, no one's forced here, no one's told here, and to me, that was the journey back, as they say.
What's the path of recovery? Like, the details will be different, but what does it look like? What does the journey look like when you are in the mode of recovery?
Recovery and Judaism are hand in hand. And what do I mean by that? If you look at actually the 12 steps, there is something called, Maimonides wrote a book called Hilchas Tshuva, right? The laws of repentance. And the 12 steps are extraordinarily similar to the Rambam's 12, I'm not sure if they're 12 steps quite, but ways to actually repent. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, it says the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, right? So the recovery in general is, let's take whatever ill adaptive, maladaptive behavior we have, right? And therefore, if you have a child struggling, or somebody's listening, you have a family member that struggles, look at your own struggles. Look at how many times you wanted to go on a diet, whatever struggle you had, want to stop TV, overworking. We all have something that we can identify with that we wanted to stop, and know that you can't stop it it's not a forever thing. So we start today, and then we first admit, right? If you do it the 12-step way, you don't have to do it the 12-step way, right? But you do have to attach yourself to be seen. You have to attach yourself to a community. You have to attach yourself to a sense of purpose. And then the most important thing you have to do is chesed, is kindness, is give it away for free.
Wow. If you don't mind me asking, share with us, where are you now? Because I'll tell you, just in listening to you, it feels to me that you are like in control of it, that you are, whatever you've gone through is now under your control, if I can say it that way.
So first, yes, I don't have a desire to drink. I had my bar mitzvah year this year. I'm 13 years sober. I don't think about drinking. But there are other areas of my life and my maladaptive behaviors that cause me shame. So, and that I choose not to give up, whether it's simple ill speak of somebody else, whether it's my eating habits, whether it's work, whatever it may be, whether it's my journey with God and the commandments, that I'm learning that I could utilize all these tools in all these areas. And at some point you stop fighting it.
Yeah.
You stop fighting needing to know why, because there is no why today. Unfortunately, I get phone calls I don't know, 50, 100, 200 a day sometimes of people are struggling and suffering.
Yeah.
And so if I start to ask why, I will spend my time being depressed and sad on why they're suffering.
What would you say to somebody that may be in the middle of their lives and there's a real addiction there, and what's stopping them from the help and the recovery is they say, you know what, I'll never be awesome. I've given up my chance of being excellent. Because I failed too miserably. I fell off too hard. And so even if I get back on, I can never really make it.
Each human being in this world is put on this world with a unique gift that only they can bring the world. And as long as you're measuring your insides by someone else's outsides, you'll never win. It's over. Forget about it. You know, that's what the surrender is all about, is saying, okay, whatever you got in store for me, man, upstairs, right? They literally say it, thy will be done, right? So, right, that the same way is as I say. So once you start to take away that piece, and it's not about the rat race, because all of us know that we've sat with people who are much older, much more experienced, much more successful than us, and none of them have said that their dollars in the bank or their big company or their successes is what made them a good person.
Right.
And I still like to fool myself and think that's true, but you know, yet, you know, so what is that? What is this imposed baloney you're giving yourself? What are you imposing upon yourself? Where is this destination you're trying to get to? So, and what, you know, so yeah, the old you is gone. And if you recover, you have the new you. So yes, I'm not the guy who, right? I'm not the real estate, you know, novelist that I once thought I would be, right? That was in a Billy Joel song. I don't even know what a novelist is, right? But okay. I'm not the real estate huge mogul that I once thought I should be, the once I was, then I fell down. But I get to help people. I get to be patient. And you're right, on my bad days, I lament those days. I was like, okay, I'd be richer than this and better than this. But when I sit down and I have somebody that I can share my experience, strength, and hope, and then they have hope, well, boom. I got something I can take with me.
Beautiful. Asha, what can I say? You've inspired me, and I am positive that you inspired everyone who's watching the show tonight. God bless you for who you are and for just the continuous hope. That's the word, the hope that you give people just by the words that you're saying. It's inspiring, man. I really, really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And I want to leave with that is, we can never give up hope, right? We ask that the man upstairs never gives up hope on us. And unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional support. It still means that always leave your hearts and doors open. Don't ever give up hope.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for shining your light on this world.
You got it. Good job.
We thank Asher for his strong and wise words. It's so important to remember that no matter where a person is in life, no matter where that person is in life, there's always hope. You can't fall too far. There is no too far. It doesn't exist in our world. I'm reminded by the words of the great Rabbi Nachman, who says, the end of the day, ein yiush klal. I remember once we were sitting in our synagogue, in our shul, and my rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Weinberger, would turn around and we would be singing songs at whatever holiday. And there was a song in which they would speak about how Rabbi Nachman would scream with all of his might. In Hebrew, it's ein yiush klal. There is no hopelessness. There is no such thing as being too far. There is no such thing as being beyond hope. Everybody has a path home. We thank Asher for his incredible words and all that he is doing now to help everybody. Our last guest is another incredible individual. His name is Menachem Znansky. He's the director of The Living Room, a clubhouse and community for Jewish young adults in recovery from addictions. He's the author of Stepping Out of the Abyss, a Jewish guide to the 12 steps, and Consciously, 6 Steps to Living Vibrantly with Our Creator. Menachem is also the editor of The Light Revealed, a social media publisher focused on the messages of Jewish spirituality and recovery, and is also the host of 2 podcasts, one called Consciously and the other Practically of Farbringen. Menachem received his master's degree in social work from the Yeshiva University Wurzweiler School of Social Work and lives in Cedarhurst, New York with his wife, Naomi, and their children. It is an honor to have him on to share his insights of just how spirituality plays into the world of recovery. Check out this interview with Menachem. So I know you wrote a book. Tell us a little bit about your book and some of the work that you do.
Okay, so I actually wrote 2 books. The first one is called Stepping Out of the Abyss. It's a Jewish guide to the 12 steps. And the other one is called Consciously, which is a book on utilizing mindfulness and meditation practices to evolve and develop a vibrant conscious contact, which is a recovery term for like a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
So the work that I do is I work with youth 18 to 35 who are emerging out of substance abuse treatment centers, and they're trying to build a life. And we try to help them with all the different aspects of that. That includes, spirituality, as maybe we'll talk about, has a big part of recovery, and particularly in the 12-step approach. But generally as well. And therefore, it sometimes includes enhancing their spirituality and their connection to Judaism and finding a place within Judaism, but also helping them, get their lives, the jobs, whatever, school, life. We have young couples that are part of our program, helping navigate that, all those kind of things.
So give us a little bit more as to what does spirituality do during this process for somebody?
So obviously addiction affects a person psychologically, but also physically. People become physically dependent on addiction. But something that emerged in the early part of the 20th century was an idea that there was actually an existential or spiritual part of addiction that was driving people back into addictive patterns, meaning you'd have treatment where someone would fall into an addictive pattern, they become addicted to alcohol or drugs or some other addiction, and then they'd go for treatment and they'd be their addiction would be relieved, they would be removed from their addiction, and then they would fall back into that pattern again and again and again. And no one really understood for a very long time. And then there was a kind of an event or a series of events that occurred in the early part of the 20th century that culminated ultimately in the development of the 12 steps through the Alcoholics Anonymous program, which is the first 12-step program. And now there's hundreds of 12-step programs, but based on an idea that was put forward by Carl Jung, right, the famous Carl Jung, was that the reason why addicts and alcoholics continue to fall into a pattern of addiction is because they're actually seeking in their addiction something other than relief from their dependency and even relief from their emotional problems. And there's some kind of spiritual angle, there was some kind of spiritual drive, so that if they were to utilize spiritual practices and help a person evolve and create a healthy and vibrant spirituality, it would act as a guard against further relapse. It would actually act as a support while somebody was seeking their initial recovery, and it would give them a vibrant and meaningful life and help them to kind of lead a really meaningful existence. So, and the 12 steps are really just developed out of that idea. The forebearers of the 12 steps, the early members of Alcoholics Anonymous, basically started to adapt different things that different people were doing, in particular one group, the Oxford group, but others as well, which are spiritual practices. How a person can develop and evolve, have a spiritual awakening, that's a term that they use, and then develop a very vibrant spiritual life.
Tell us, if you can, how that sort of general spiritual focus, is it in line with Judaism? Is it something that is very much a part of Jewish practice? Is it something that we've known already, but we didn't really connect the dots until recently?
The idea that we could utilize and leverage a relationship with God to emerge out of the darkness of an abyss of addiction is not something that's contrary to Judaism at all. In fact, it's very, very much related. The recovery programs, and specifically the 12-step programs, really focused on what works. So they weren't being driven by ideology. It was driven by trial and error. So the fact, this is something I say to Jewish people all the time, the fact that they came out with something that actually is totally in line with Judaism is not surprising because the Torah is true. So it makes sense that what they did was true. They weren't driven by a Christian ideology or any other ideology. They weren't driven even by a psychological ideology. They just were trying things to figure out what would work and what would give them a vibrant relationship with God. And what they ended up with is, in fact, very much connected to Judaism. My first book, Stepping Out of the Abyss, which I wrote with Aryeh Buxbayev and Rabbi Yoni Feiner, actually wrote a section on Judaism and recovery, highlights a lot of these things. And Rabbi Abraham Tursky, be remiss not to mention him at all. He's the grandfather of Jewish recovery, has highlighted, 100 times, 1,000 times, the connectedness. But some of the really meaningful principles that I kind of jotted down here was that, first of all, the entire basis of the recovery program and the process of incorporating spirituality into a recovery from addiction is based on the principle of acceptance, right? It's a very, very powerful principle. Today, it's become recognized as a powerful psychological principle, but acceptance, at least especially as it's practiced through the 12 steps, is really what we in Judaism called emunah or bitachon, right? Which is faith and trust, but specifically faith and trust that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, that the challenges that I'm having are one that I'm, so to speak, destined for, and that God wants me to operate from here. It's like there's a reading in the main text of Alcoholics Anonymous, a story of a doctor who kind of came to the conclusion that, and he said that acceptance was the key to his recovery from his alcoholism, because he came to the conclusion, he said, I'm an alcoholic, what am I going to do about it now? So instead of kind of fighting against that tide and trying to avoid that fact, by accepting that fact, that was a springboard towards moving forward. And that's in the foundation of step one. But there's a spiritual side of that, because it means I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. As long as a person feels like they're not where they're supposed to be, they're always kind of feeling like they should be somewhere else. And the foundation of the recovery program, and this is oftentimes a foundation in Emunah, is like, I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm in Egypt. I'm in the darkness. I'm surrounded by servitude and slavery and what we call shibud, and God can reach his hand in and help me, as we did in literally in the story of Egypt. God, he did not send an angel, he did not send a messenger, he himself came down. That principle, but that the suffering has meaningfulness and purposefulness, is a very Jewish idea. Another idea is that honesty is the key, and we know that our tradition tells us that the seal of God is truth and honesty. And what they found in the recovery program is that the key to recovery from addiction is to learn how to be honest, not only with other people, but with ourselves, right? The foundation of the whole thing is to learn how to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with God, to be honest with others. And that is the principle of the whole thing. Self-reflection and inventory is part of that honesty process. A healthy process of self-reflection and inventory is a vital part of the recovery process. And that is a vital part of Judaism, right? We call cheshbon hanefesh, but not like a critical kind of destructive form of beating ourselves up, but really a vibrant way of kind of looking at what reality is and what we can do better. And then finally, the linchpin of the whole recovery program is service, chesed, right? That is the foundation of the whole thing. And not only that, but that chesed is the main pathway to invite God into our lives. The key in Judaism, the way that we put a prominence on kindness, tikkun olam, but also doing kindness, but also charity. Charity is, the Jewish people are of the, charity is like, it's in our blood. But the foundation is that when we make ourselves channels of goodness, of charity, it opens the door for us to recover from our most pervasive challenges. And that's at the core of the recovery process.
Amazing. Menachem, thank you so much for joining us today and for all the work that you do for the community and for the world at large. And thank you for shining your light on this world.
No, thank you so much, Charlie. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank Menachem for his kind words. It reminds me of a lot of what he's saying, what everybody's saying. It really reminds me of the great wise words of King Solomon in Proverbs, that a righteous man will fall seven times and get up. Check out this wonderful short video from Gav Friedman on this exact topic.
So there I was, South Africa, about an hour and a half outside of Cape Town, little town called Worcester. And I come to realize my shoes are falling apart. So I turned to the guy driving. I said, you know any stores around here? He says, look around. No one's really wearing any shoes. But you know what? I think I know a place. We go out there and we find this mall. And as I'm going from store to store, I can't find anything till I finally come to this sporting goods store. I'm looking around, and now, you're in a store, you look at other things also. I'm looking around, I see on the wall all these inspirational quotes. You can do it. Keep pushing. Don't give up. I see this big sign in front of me that says, fall 7 times, get up 8. And underneath it, in big black letters, it says, anonymous. And I think to myself, anonymous? That's not anonymous. I know who said that. I called the guy who was working there. I said, hey, come here, you know that sign? He goes, yeah. I said, I know who wrote that. He goes, man, I got paid 20 Rand an hour. I don't care who wrote it. Friends, King Solomon comes along and he tells us in his bestseller, Mishlei, Proverbs, chapter 24, verse 16, and I quote, Ki sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. The righteous person falls 7 times, but he gets up again. Some of us are mistaken. And we think, what's the difference between someone who's successful and someone who's not? We know the winner. We know the successful person. He never falls. He's always doing great. She's always successful. She always makes it. But little do we realize how mistaken we are. The difference between a winner and a loser, between success and non-success, is not that one falls and one doesn't. They both fall. The difference is that the winner, the successful person, gets back up. Now you ask yourself, why 7? What does that mean that 7 times the righteous person falls? What's 7? 7 are the days of the week. This is not a one-time thing. You say to yourself, well, okay, I get it. You could fall and get back up, but I keep falling. How could I ever succeed? Do I have any chance? I might as well give up. Says the verse, keep plugging, baby. Keep plugging. Because it's constant. It's every day. It's going to happen. And not only that, our sages tell us, Yerida letzorech aliyah. We go down in order to go up. Not only is that falling not bad, it may even be the impetus to unbelievable growth. Any questions, comments, stories, jokes, attacks? As always, leave them in the comments. Looking forward to hearing from you.
And we thank you so much for being here tonight. Like I said earlier in the show, it's so critical that we recognize that at the core of what it means to be a Jew is the recognition that we are not defined by our bodies. We're not really even defined by our actions. Our actions have weight. Our actions matter. The whole Torah speaks about our actions that matter, but they don't define us. There's something that is inside us that is greater than anything this physical world can bear, and that is our soul. And just for a minute to drive this point home, although it was mentioned earlier, the soul that we have, the energy that is opening up my eyes and your eyes, that energy is literally a piece of the divine in a way that our brains can't possibly comprehend. The creator of humanity, the divine energy that is this entire world, blew, if you will, infused a bit of him inside us. So wherever you are in the world, wherever you think you are vis-a-vis God, whatever your background, whatever your denomination, whether you believe in him or not, whether you're into it or not, whether you're inspired or not, whether you are fully quote unquote healthy, whether you are in the front or the back of any line that you think is important. What you've done pales in comparison to who you are, because who you are is a piece of God. Who you are is a ray of the divine energy. And that value, if you will, that essence is so much greater than anything that we could do in this world. In fact, our whole reason for being here is to exude that, is to share that, is to express that with others, is to bring that into the world. And the reason why this is so critical is because this was the message that God gave the Jewish people in Egypt. What he shared with them, what he taught them, was that I know you think that you're a bunch of slaves that have no chance of being the noble nation of princes and princesses that could stand before the Creator. But trust me, you are. Brush yourselves off. Come out of the country that held you back. Go to the desert away from all distractions. And in between Passover and Shavuot, pick yourself up. What's inside is greater. There's nothing you can't overcome. And when you continue to grow, you always have a place in my home. A Jew always knows that there's a place in God's home for him. A Jew always knows that there's no such thing as hopelessness. And no matter what somebody does, when they look themselves in the mirror, what they see back is an incredible infinite potential. That's this period of time. And so whether or not a person is struggling with something that is small, or whether you know or are someone struggling with something much larger, which you think you can't grow out of, you think you can't get bigger from, you think you can't overcome and be better from, it's not true. There's always hope. There's always help. And if you're struggling with something, there's always someone around that'll accept you. And you always know that there's a way back home. And if you know someone that is struggling, remember, the most powerful thing you can do, besides helping them get help, the most powerful thing you can do is see the soul inside them. You never lose hope in another. You never, ever give up on another. And when you have that ability to see the greatness in each other, to see the greatness in ourselves, miracles happen. Great things happen. We have the opportunity to overcome challenges we never knew possible. That's this period of time. And that, by the way, in my opinion, is what Shabbat is all about. Shabbat is that time where God puts us back in the desert. Shabbat is that time where God puts us back and says, relax. I know what you did. It wasn't perfect, or it was. You're with me now. And I don't need you to do anything to be valuable. You see, when Shabbat comes, and you stand in front of the Creator, and he says, we're partners. He knows all the ups and the downs and says, I'm not judging what you did, because I'd have you do stuff. You don't do on Shabbat. You are on Shabbat. And when a person separates who I am and what I do, which is the exercise of Shabbat, he starts to realize that who I am is a piece of the infinite. And whatever I did last week, I can do it differently next week. 7 days of the week last week don't have to be the 7 days of the week the next week. So on behalf of me and mine to you and yours, I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Let's see the best in each other. Let's make sure that everyone knows what we see in them. Let's also see the best in ourselves. And whatever it is that we're struggling with, from what seems like small to what seems like insurmountable, remember, the Jewish people struggled and has been struggling. But what keeps us up is that we know that we come from, all of us, all of humanity comes from different stuff. There's always hope. There's always help. And there's always a home. An incredible Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. I hope next week we get to see each other in Jerusalem, but if not, we'll see you back here. Shabbat Shalom.
As I stand in candlelight, with my hands upon my eyes, there's a passion in my prayers that rends the skies. For a mother's tears can shatter every gate that bars the way. All the heavens will echo those words that mothers say.
Vizakeni, Vizakeni, take my children by the hand, help them walk along your way. May they never go astray. May they know you as I know you. Oh Hashem, accept my plea. Give me children who give nachas. Vizakeni,
Vizakeni, Vizakeni, take my children by the hand, help them walk along your way. May they never go astray. May they know you as I know you. Oh Hashem, accept my plea. Give me children who give nachas. Vizakeni.
as I stand in candlelight, while my home is dark and still, there's a void inside my heart I long to fill. Will I ever be a mother? Will that blessing come my way? Will I stand by the candles with gratitude and prayer?
Vizakeni, Vizakeni, take my children by the hand, help them walk along your way. May they never go astray. May they know you as I know you. Oh Hashem, accept my plea. Give me children who give nafas. Vizakeni, 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 Vizakeni,
Nachas v'nayedekin, zaru chayu v'kayumu. Jede mishpuche midibruche, v'zakayni.
Vizakeni, Vizakeni, take our children by the hand,
Help them walk along your way. May they never go astray. May they know you as we know you. Hashem, accept
give
our
us children who give nafas. Vizakeni,
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 Vizakeni. Vizakeni.